Hey guys, Brian here with Forest to Farm Project. We're here with Scott Martin from Husqvarna, and he's taking us through our chainsaw safety series. Today we're going to be talking about the specifics of chainsaw startup. And for those that haven't been following along, Scott, tell us a little about yourself.
So I'm Scott Martin with Husqvarna. I've been with the company for almost 25 years and sales rep for upstate South Carolina. Just happy to be here today.
We really appreciate it. Let's learn about starting a saw properly.
Sure. So before we just go into starting the saw, a couple of preliminary things. Number one, make sure that you're using your PPE, right? Your personal protective equipment, be it Chaps, be it helmet systems, ear muffs, any and all of the protective items that we've talked about in previous segments here. Make sure you're utilizing all that. Outside of that, you want to inspect the saw and make sure the saw is in good working order. Make sure there's no broken or missing pieces. In the previous segment, we talked about having the chain catcher in place, or a chain brake mechanism that is fully functional and working in proper order.
Yeah.
Outside of that, making sure that the saw is worthy of you getting behind it and going out there and doing the job, right? So once you determine that, a couple of procedural things that you'll normally do is chain brake needs to be engaged, right? So chain brake is engaged, that way the chain's not moving. Should the saw start on the first pull, you want to make sure that chain brake is engaged, because if not, it's usually going to run at a higher RPMs right off the bat, and then you could get chain rotation out of that, and that's not a safe environment.
Yeah.
So making sure the chain brake is engaged. The other thing is that the saw has it. This particular saw here, 72cc saw, has a decompression valve right here. So if you push that decompression valve in, what it does is it allows enough of the pressure inside the cylinder to escape, so when you go to start it, it's much easier to start.
Okay.
By about 40% as far as what it allows to get out. So much easier to start, and on the starting mechanism and on your shoulder.
Yeah.
Right. Another thing is the air purge. If the saw has an air purge like this, you can hit this air purge to the point where the bulb fills up with fuel. This is not to be confused with a primer bulb, because it really serves two different functions. An air purge, basically what that does is it gets fresh air from the tank into the carburetor, and it gets the air out of the lines. Any excess fuel goes back into the tank, so there's really no opportunity to flood a saw with this type of mechanism. So you've got you do have a way for all that excess fuel to go back into the tank.
Yeah.
A primer system basically floods the carburetor with fuel, so you can prime something and then you flood the carburetor very easily. All of our pro saws and all the saws that we offer, they're all air purge, so it does make it easy to start.
Okay, cool.
So you've got this engaged, you've got your decompression valve engaged here. You have now filled up the air purge with fuel, so that way you know that you've got fresh fuel in the system and the lines in the carburetor. And at that point, what you'll see is the on-off switch and choke mechanism. So on this particular saw, a lot of different saws out there. A lot of our saws work exactly the way that I'm going to show you here. But essentially, if you pull the on-off switch up to that position there, you pull it out and you rotate it up. Now the saw is turned on, the fast idle is set, and the choke is set. So in a cold start position, the saw's not been ran before, you would want to choke this, right? And then once I go to pull it, the saw's going to pop one time, then it's going to die. When it dies, then take the choke off into the run position, and then you're going to start the saw again, doing the same, making sure the same things are engaged, decompression valve and chain brake and whatnot. But at that point, you would leave the saw in the run position. You're not on choke, because you've already popped once.
Yeah.
So now you're in the run position. So you go to start it, saw's going to crank up and it's going to run at a high RPMs until you hit the throttle one time. It releases the fast idle, and now the saw's ready to go.
Okay.
And so if you want, I can we can show the two proper mechanisms, methods rather, that we like to talk about when starting a saw. One is a leg lock mechanism or method, excuse me, and the other is a ground start method. So we'll
let's go
explain
through
both
that.
of those. Sure.
All right.
Okay, so as we talked about earlier, the two methods that we like to employ, one is the leg lock method, the other is the ground start method. So I'll explain both of those. Leg lock method first. As we talked about, make sure that the chain brake is engaged. You've got the decompression valve, if you have one, engaged here. You've got the air purge, so you're ready to go. And choke is on. saw is on. With your left hand wrapped around the corner right here, take the saw, put it on the inside of your left knee. Your right leg goes around the rear handle. Now the saw is totally pinned right here in this area. If I go to pull it, I've got full control of the saw at all points in time. I'll explain. So now what we'll do is take it off of choke into the run position. As you can see, when I pulled the saw, I had total control of it. Saw didn't jerk out of my hands. I had control the whole time. So that is the method that I like to employ, just because it's very easy, it's very fast, it's very efficient. All right, so the second method we talked about is the ground start method. Basically, the saw's on the ground. I've got my right foot going through the stirrup right here, so I've got control of the back of the saw. My left hand, like always, is going to be wrapped around the front handle here. I've got my thumb wrapped and not in a fashion like this way. You would tend to, especially if you were sweaty, to come off the handle. So I've got to make sure that your thumb is wrapped and chain brake is engaged. All the other things we talked about before, decompression valve is engaged here. Your choke mechanism is on. If the saw is hot, you can choke it, and then you can take it back down to the run position. If the saw is cold, you choke it and leave it on choke. So here's what we'll do. I'm going to start it like this. And if you will, just take a look at the saw. I'm in control of the saw. The saw's pinned down to the ground. It's very safe. Chain's not turning. The saw's not moving around, things like that. So in both of those examples, the saw was totally in control the whole time, whether it was in the leg lock position or if it was on the ground. Both ways are acceptable. What we don't want to do is air start or drop start methods. And I'm sure you've seen this before, when people will hold the saw in their left hand, turn the saw on, which I'm not going to do this, but they would drop the saw like this and pull with their right hand, dropping the saw with their left hand, giving, engaging the starter mechanism. The problem with that is that when that happens, the saw could turn on immediately. And if it does, you've only got one hand on the saw. You're not in control of the saw. There's a lot of this going on because now you've got the compression inside of the cylinder that's causing some of that bucking motion. So air starting is not a good way to do this. Not safe at all. The other way that people talk about doing it is they'll grab the saw by the rear handle here and pull it with their left hand. Well, this is extremely dangerous in the fact that now I've got, in this case, a 24-inch bar. I've got the bar coming right down to the ground. So let's just say that if you're using this method and you have the chain brake off, well, now you've got the chain rotating as soon as it starts. Number one. Number two, look where my trigger finger is. It's right here on top of the trigger. So as soon as that saw starts, it's going to be turning up to full RPMs. Chain brake is not on. Now you've got a really dangerous situation because I've got access to the ground with the tip of the bar, and that could be all kinds of bad in a lot of different ways. So air drop methods, air start methods, not a good way to do that. So use the leg lock mechanism or leg lock method or the ground start method. Both ways are extremely efficient and very easy and safe. All right, so now that we've covered the starting procedures of the saw, we're actually starting from a leg lock position or ground start position. Mm-hmm. So we started the saw properly. Next transition there is going to be using the saw in the work environment. Mm-hmm. One of the things that you want to make sure that you're utilizing, if you're taking more than 2 steps in the work environment, you want to make sure that you're engaging the chain brake. Yeah. And the purpose for that is I've got one piece of wood. Now I cut it. Now I've got 2 pieces of wood. Mm-hmm. And shifting and the weight and wherever else the geography could make one of those pieces kind of roll towards you or whatever. So you want to make sure that when you're using the saw, if I happen to take more than 2 steps you know, I've got that chain brake engaged.
Yeah.
Right. Once I get ready to make my cut, my left hand is wrapped, my left thumb is wrapped around the front handle, so I've got access to hold the saw, and I can easily pull that back. And I can do that anywhere because the chain brake is hinged on both sides. I can do that anywhere on the handle.
Yeah.
So now I've got access to the saw. I disengage the chain brake. I make my cut, and then as soon as I get through, just rotate your wrist forward. It's easy.
It's a slight rotation.
It's
right
very
on.
simple, and it's just you know, it doesn't take any time to do.
Yeah.
Puts you in a safe environment. Now the saw is stopped. Saw may be running. Chain is stopped. It's locked in. So you know, you make your cut, disengage, make another cut, engage.
Yeah.
That easy. A couple of other things too is if I'm in the work environment and I've got somebody with me, even if you didn't have somebody with me, to get the saw from one point to the other, the thing that you want to make sure you're doing is have the saw facing backwards, right? What I don't want to do is have the saw this way when I'm going through this environment and you've got all these sticks and, you know, debris and whatnot, and I happen to fall on top of it, even if the chain brake is engaged.
Yeah.
It's a lot of sharp teeth.
It's a sharp chain.
It's a lot of sharp teeth and a lot of sharp chain right there. I don't want to fall onto it.
Yeah.
So what I want to make sure is that the saw is facing behind me. Anybody's following behind you at that point, they need to heed that space. They need to give you the space to be able to, if they were to fall, they're not falling on top of the chain.
Right. You need a few seconds. Give more than your height and distance between the person with the chainsaw and you.
Absolutely.
Because if you fall and lunge forward as you fall, you don't want to go face first into that chain.
Right. Correct. So, just in the work environment, that's those are two things that are very important. You know, is getting from one point to the other safely and working in the environment also. Also, one thing I do want to stress on is stance. Right. So once you started the saw and you're making a cut, what you don't want to do is stand like this. You've got no way to deflect any of the you know, any result that may happen with what you're cutting. You want to stand in a boxer position, right? Number one. Number two, all chainsaws are made for right-handed folks.
Yeah.
It's made to run in a right-handed application. I shouldn't say it's made for right-handed folks, but it is made to run in a right-handed application. Left hand's forward, right hand is back. This is not the way to run a saw. Saws aren't designed that way because now I've crossed the plane of that bar. Puts me in a bad environment should there be a kickback.
Yeah.
So I'm here. If you do have a kickback, now it's facing away from me. I'm not going to be in direct line of contact with it.
Yeah.
So if I happen to be in that box or stance like this, I can absorb a lot of any kind of deflection or whatever that I have to do because of what's going on around me. And the other thing too is that when you're making a cut, there's no need to look right into the kerf of what you're cutting. The saw is going to do the work, right? So what you don't want to do necessarily is sit here and watch this thing go into the kerf. Number one, there's no reason for it. Number two, you put yourself in a really dangerous position. Should there be a kickback based on what's on the other end of what you're cutting, could come into contact with the kickback zone right there. And if that happens, you're going to get kickback. And if you're looking at it, now you're putting your face in the line of contact, and that's just not a good environment. So just making sure that you're using some common sense, you know, methods to employ there, you know, as far as the stance, starting, you know, and other things like that.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I have done a ton of air starting in my time cutting trees, and
hopefully you won't now.
I will not do it anymore.
Good. Good.
Yeah. So
if we've helped one person, we've done a good job.
There's always something to learn, no matter how much you've done of something.
Good.
And I've learned a ton right now. I'm
good.
Very appreciative.
Glad to do it. Sorry.
Yeah, yo, you're fine, man. Really appreciate you being here and doing this. This is awesome. Hope you guys are learning something as well. And if you are, give us a big thumbs up for a like. Hit that subscribe button below. Hit the bell next to the subscribe button so you get notified when new videos come out. Check us out on Instagram and Facebook. Have a good one, guys.
Take care. Saw safely.